Welcome to our video on how to install brake rotors on the front wheels of our Catrike 559s. What you'll need are the brake rotors that come with the Catrike. They're Avid G2 CS clean sweep rotors and they're 160 millimeters. Included with the rotors are also 6 bolts per wheel. Now these are Torx T25 bolts, and this is what holds the rotors to the wheels. Now to tighten the bolts, you're going to need a Torx socket. In this particular case, we're using a Torx socket and a ratcheting socket wrench. Now, if you do not have a ratcheting socket wrench, you can use a tool like a Park Tools Torx T25 L-handled wrench, or you could even use a screwdriver with a Torx bit. To tighten the bolts to the correct tension, you're going to need a torque wrench. We use a Park Tools TW-5 ratcheting torque wrench. Now to make it work with our Torx socket, we need an adapter to go from the 1/2 inch drive on the socket wrench to the 3/8 inch drive on our Torx socket. And my hands are still a little greasy even though I've washed them, so we're going to need some nitrile gloves to stop from contaminating the rotors. I also have a silver Sharpie marker, and I use this for a couple of things. I mark on the tire the direction of rotation of the tire pressure requirements, which makes it easier when I'm pumping the tire, as well whether or not the tire is a left or right, because on a trike this matters. If you look at the rotors, there is actually an arrow, and that arrow points in the direction that the rotor must turn while the wheel is in motion. And if you look closely on the rubber tire itself, there is another arrow that shows the direction of rotation. With the silver Sharpie, I mark this direction so that I don't mix up the left and right tires. Since your trike came with 2 rotors, it's good to look at both of them because all rotors turn in the same direction and are marked the same way. And what this means is that depending on what wheel this rotor sits, you're going to have to flip it. Now let's take a look and see how this works. Now this is the trike's left wheel. As you can see, the arrows point in opposite directions. So to make this work, you must turn over the rotor and place it on the wheel in the correct direction. If when you look at the direction of rotation of your wheels and both of them are the same, it's simply a matter of removing the rubber and turning it over on the rim. We actually had to do this twice with 2 different Catrike wheels assemblies that we received. Now it's time to install the Torx T25 bolts on the wheel. Each bolt has some blue Loctite on it, and you simply align the rotor and the hub itself, and then you install all the bolts finger tight. What will happen is as you tighten them down, when it hits the Loctite, the bolts won't go in anymore. And so you just install all of them hand tight, and once they're all in and they're all snugged up, it's then time to tighten them up with a T25 Torx. You can either use the Torx handled L wrench by Park Tools, and if you're using this tool, I like using the long section first to get it down a bit. And then I use the short part with the long handle to give me leverage. And I can actually just spin the wheel and it works great to tighten it up. If you're using a ratcheting socket, I use the little turn knob on the top of our ratcheting socket to get it down as far as it'll go. Once I've done this, then I shift over from using the little knob and I start going through a ratcheting process with the full length of the ratchet wrench. Now be aware, do not use your Park Tools ratcheting torque wrench to do this. It'll damage the mechanism inside of it and it'll destroy the torque wrench. So always use either an L-handled wrench or a proper ratchet to snug them up. At this point, only tighten up these bolts just so they're barely holding the rotor in place. You don't want to snug up too tight at this point because we still have to center the rotor. Now, centering the rotor is actually very important. However, nobody talks about it, and I've never read it in any of the instructions for rotors. What actually happens is if you don't center the rotor, it can actually move vertically up and down in the brake calipers as you're trying to brake. With trikes, we have found this to be the main cause for squeaking of the rotor during low-speed braking. Now, when you're looking at the rotor and the bolt assembly, the bolts should be equally spaced all around the rotor. If they move in any direction, you can get this problem of the rotor moving up and down. So take your time and really center these bolts with the equal amount of rotor all the way around them. What I like to do is, as I center it, I get it absolutely perfect and I tighten up 2 of the bolts. Once I've snugged up these bolts, I then go back again and I look at the rotor to see if it's absolutely perfect. If it isn't, I make changes. If it's okay, then I snug up the rest of the bolts. Just snug enough so the rotor won't move on the hub, because next it's time to torque them to the correct specs. Lucky for us, we don't have to go looking for the torque specs. They're actually printed right on the rotor itself. According to Avid, we're supposed to tighten these bolts up to 6.2 Newton meters. So with the T25 socket on our TW-5 torque wrench, We then set the torque wrench to 6.2 Newton meters and tighten them up. I like to actually do one bolt and then do the bolt across from it. This way I kind of feel that it's kind of being pushed down or pulled down towards the hub equally. And I just go through and I just tighten each one up to the correct standards. Once the torque wrench goes click, it's done and you don't need to do any more. And don't forget, once you're finished using your torque wrench, dial it back to 0 because there's no better way to destroy a good torque wrench than to leave it at a setting. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it's been of some help. Our recumbent trike portion of our series is broken down into 9 chapters or parts, and within each chapter are multiple episodes. You've just finished watching one of the episodes in the assembly video series. So stay tuned as we expand this series out into a wide variety of outdoor topics. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the trail.